So here's a story about trying to do your best. Many years ago, when I was a little girl, my father let me help him with a project that was close to his heart. We lived on a small island at the very bottom of England called the Isle of Wight, and we lived on the western end of the island. The local business association had a little booklet that was printed up each year called West Wight What's On, containing really useful information for the many visitors that came to the island each summer, and which was placed on the ferries and in bus terminals, businesses, and cafes. Each week, my father would type up the additional events that were taking place over the next few days, and these were printed on his big Gestetner machine. Now, you probably remember those great big things. You had to wind the handle. Excuse me. And then a copy of the weekly events was placed inside this outer cover. The final job was to stamp the price on the top right-hand corner of the front cover. It was either threepence or sixpence, I don't remember any longer, but it was the equivalent of maybe a nickel. He asked me one day if I would like to happily agreed. I started before long. I got a little bored and lackadaisical with my stamp, putting some on the top, some on the bottom, some in the middle, and so on. My father came in to see how I was doing and was not impressed, and nor was he happy. This publication was important to him, and he wanted it to reflect the professional manner in which it was produced. He made me stop right then and there, sit down at the kitchen table, and with paper and pen in hand, write the words, "If a job is worth doing, it is worth doing well," 100 times. Yes, 100 old-fashioned lines. I was very repentant and duly wrote the lines, and I have never forgotten his admonishment. And what he explained to me was, it wasn't a difficult job and I had struggled to complete it. I hadn't tried. I hadn't given it my best. And that's all we can ask for ourselves and others, that when you undertake something, you give it your best shot, even if it is repetitive and dead boring. Our psalm this morning celebrates the majesty of God in Zion, yet speaks of kings facing challenges as they gathered together, some facing their fears and some fleeing from them. It speaks of childbirth, certainly one of the most difficult activities faced by many women, which normally allows for no easy shortcuts, but which results in the emergence of a new life. So also shall the people rejoice in God's love and protection as they walk around the citadels of the city. In our second reading today from Corinthians, the Apostle Paul certainly gave his best shot to all that he attempted. And as we read in the passage today from his second letter to the Corinthians, he was struggling with many things. As I learned in my theological studies, many of Paul's letters are written in response to a situation that has arisen in one of the many Christian communities that he founded. His second letter to the church in Corinth deals in large part with the crisis in confidence between Paul and the believers in that area, and addresses the words and feelings of those who opposed him. Sadly, they've long been lost, but it tells us much about Paul's own life, ministry, and the concern he felt for the churches he had established. He's clearly naming himself as someone who's had a vision of the third heaven, the highest ecstasy, and yet, lest he boast, he's been plagued with some kind of affliction, which is not elaborated upon, but which he believes is put upon him to remind him of his humanity and humility. But through it all, what he does boast about is his perseverance. I wonder sometimes, as have many through time, what his affliction might have been. A disability of some kind, a speech impediment perhaps, persistent resistance and heckling by some in his audience, an ongoing and chronic pain. Any of these could have made his ministry more difficult and more challenging. Whatever it was, Paul appears to embrace it because it reminds him of his reliance upon God's grace in all things, and he still gives it his best shot. In our gospel reading today from Mark, the disciples are also faced with a pretty daunting task. Following the rather unceremonious reception that Jesus received in Nazareth, where he's ridiculed by friends and neighbors, the disciples are commissioned to share the good news and heal people. I don't know about you, but had I been one of those disciples, I would have been trying to find any excuse not to go. This is a daunting challenge they're facing, especially as Jesus tells them to take nothing with them except a walking staff. They carry no bedroll, no food, no money, not even a change of clothing. They must rely on the kindness and generosity of strangers, which, considering the lack of bathing facilities and clean clothes, must have made them pretty stinky house guests. But they persevered. They gave it their best effort, and they are rewarded. They stay in some places for a few days telling people of the good news, and sometimes they're not well received and have to move on. But as they persevere onwards, they find they are able to cure people of physical and mental illnesses and anoint many for healing, changing lives forever. We all know of people who faced and overcome incredible difficulties to achieve a goal. The one that always comes to mind for me is Terry Fox, who ran about 35 kilometers a day, every day, for 143 days, before the cancer that was racking his body and had already claimed his right leg, finally claimed his lungs too. And as we prepare for the Olympic Games to begin in Tokyo in just for a couple of weeks, we cannot help but admire the athletes who will be participating for the incredible dedication and perseverance they put into their training. For many of them, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and nothing but their absolute best is going to be of any good to them. Even more amazing are the Paralympians who will also be competing. For them, not only do they have to face the rigorous training schedule to a very high standard in order to compete at the Olympic level, they have the additional challenge of some kind of physical obstacle which has to be overcome. To say they give their best is an understatement. But not everyone is called to be an Olympian or run a marathon. Most of us just simply want to get through our lives reasonably successfully and live fulfilling lives. Even that, however, should mean that we give everything we undertake our very best effort. Because when you try your best, you can achieve much. If you don't believe me, just watch ants at work. One by one, piece by piece, a colony of ants can build a 6-foot-high anthill, one grain of sand at a time. My littlest grandson has just finished grade 2, which for the most part in Ontario, where they live, was done online. He had to collect the contents of his school desk this past week, and when he looked inside the bag, which had been packed by his teacher, he was thrilled at all the stuff that he hadn't seen for many weeks, even months. But his teacher included a nice little card wishing him good luck in grade 3, and she wrote in it, "Always do your best." Wise words for my grandson to follow, and wise words for us to follow. The gospel today tells us that if we trust in God and try to do our best always, even if the task ahead terrifies us and things don't work out perfectly, and they very often won't, we may reap rewards in ways that may not be immediately apparent, and maybe even more than we can ask or imagine, but which in the hands of God will always work to the benefit of God's kingdom. and to the furtherance of our faith. So keep on keeping on and try your best. Amen.